Welcome everyone. My name is Kim, and today we're going to talk a little bit about English paper piecing. English paper piecing is one of the simplest ways to get started with quilting, especially the piecing aspect of it. It requires very few tools. You can use any type of fabric you want to, and you can come up with a variety of different patterns depending on what your needs or wants might be. Today I want to show you a few before we get started and show you a little bit of the variety that is possible using English paper piecing. First of all, I want to show you this. This is a more of a traditional pattern. This is a grandmother's flower garden pattern. It's probably, I would say, one of the oldest types. And it is designed using hexagons, and it's just a variety of different hexagons. This particular quilt, I used mostly scraps that I had. I kept it to pastels, more feminine colors, and I wanted to use a white background instead of the traditional paths between the flowers, and I did not want to use the big flowers. This allowed me to use a greater variety of different fabrics. With this particular quilt, most of the fabrics in here were leftovers from projects that I had done, some very old, some new. There are a couple of different fabrics that I purchased especially for this. But it's a good variety of different colors and patterns. Like I said, very soft, very feminine. Maybe something you might want to use for a girl's bedroom or a baby, or even a room that you had designed that had a feminine touch to it. There are others I want to show you as well that are decidedly more masculine. But this one was very simple. This quilt was almost exclusively done by hand. The binding was put on completely by hand. The only thing that was done by machine is this is a large piece of English paper piecing that is appliqued onto 4 strips of fabric on the sides to give it a solid straight backing as opposed to a meandered or the actual pieces of the flowers. And those 4 strips were put together with 4 mitered seams in the corner that were done by machine. The rest of it is entirely by hand. And then it was quilted by hand on top of that. This piece is probably about 5 years old. It's used every day. It's been washed probably every week, every 2 weeks maybe. Your usual washing machine, throw it in the dryer, take it back out and use it again. So it's very durable. Anyone who tells you that English paper piecing is not durable, I would have a contradiction to that using this quilt as an example. Like I said, it's 5 years old, gets used every day. Then another example of English paper piecing would be this design. This is just stars. It was almost exclusively made up with it's either a jelly roll or a group of fat quarters that were sold together as a group, and it's light colors that were designed to be more fallish looking. This particular one is also appliqued at the edges onto a solid piece of fabric to give it the straight borders. And I think that this binding was sewn on by machine on one side, flipped over and sewn on by hand. So, but you could do it all by hand if you like. Then we have this piece. Here's another example. The stars here are paper piecing. They were, I believe that these are 60-degree triangles, and that's one set of triangles followed by another set of triangles followed by a third set of triangles. to give a large star design. And then on top of that, then these pieces were sewn on. This star was sewn onto this star by hand. And these are actually stars as well. And then this piece acts like a binding to that applique piece onto this unit. And then the background is all a solid piece. That makes this a little bit heavier because underneath the star is another piece of fabric. So it does make it a little bit heavier, a little bit warmer. And again, this binding is the same way. It's done by machine on one side and then flipped over to the other side and sewn by hand. There are many different types of patterns. Some of them have been around for decades, centuries even. And then there are new patterns that are out that are very popular right now. There are a couple of different designers, and some of them are very intricate in their design. They use specific colors to give a design, and some of them range in pieces that are 1/2 inch, which is tiny, 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 tiny. This is a 1-inch hexagon, so that gives you an idea what a 1/2 inch piece would be like. But they're beautiful. They're absolutely beautiful. It takes a lot of patience to do something like that. It takes a lot of time. That's something else I'd like to talk to you about with English paper piecing. It's not a fast process. It does take time to get your fabrics prepped, to do the pieces themselves, and then to assemble them. So if you're looking for something to whip up in a hurry, this is probably not the type of quilting for you. But if you're looking for something that's slow, it's a project that you can do while you're watching TV. You can take it with you. It travels extremely well. You can take it with you on a car trip. You can take it while you're waiting on your child to get finished with their practice at school, or waiting on a doctor's appointment. Any type of thing, this will travel in something as small as a little container like this, or a little pouch. A little zipper pouch works too. What do you need? You need fabrics. Now, your selection of fabrics that you can use is unlimited. You can purchase new fabric. You can use fabrics that you have, scraps that you have left over. You can purchase, let's say, shirts from your thrift store and cut those apart and use those. And those make beautiful pieces as well. Generally, with quilting, most people recommend or desire to have quilts that are 100% cotton. I will say that's my desire as well, but sometimes when you're using what you have, your fabrics aren't 100% cotton. In this piece I showed you, there are some pieces that are a blend. What I find the difference is when it is a blend, it doesn't shrink quite as much as a cotton fabric. So they will tend to be a little puffier. And if you looked hard enough on this one, you could probably distinguish which ones were the blend with the polyester and the cotton. But overall, it doesn't make that big of a difference. So just kind of as you gain some experience, you can know which ones you want to use and which ones would be undesirable. I would not necessarily recommend 100% cotton as a fabric that I would use, but there could be some situations where it would be acceptable. Now, I want to show you in a series of short videos how to create a project. And the project that I'm working on for this is a scrappy quilt, meaning that all of the fabrics in this quilt are fabrics that I already had. I did not limit my fabrics and my choices to specific colors or patterns. It was anything I had that was 100% cotton. The only fabric that I've purchased for this is the fabric that's the border. And this is a Kona. The color is steel. It is 100% cotton. It's my first time using Kona as far as I know. And the jury's still out. I like the color. I like the fact that I know if I go back to the store and purchase a piece of Kona steel, it's going to be the same. So, and there is available in a lot of different places, or I could even order it online. So I do like that. But other than that, this is a new design for me. I'm not, to be honest, perfectly comfortable with completely scrappy quilts, but it's working out pretty good. And I wanted something that would use mostly the scrappy. That's why I chose the larger diamond shape here for it. And then the Kona to be the thing that drew it all together. So that's what I'm making, and that will be the focus of 3 or 4 videos about how to do a English paper piecing quilt. And we're going to start out with the very basics today, so that after you watch this video, you will know how to start this. And as we move forward, we'll be talking about how to put it all together, how to bring it all together, and at the end, how to assemble it and bind it, and then begin to quilt. So let's start with the very basics. What you're going to need, this particular quilt is a 1-inch hexagon. You can get this hexagon many different ways. You can print out a piece of paper and cut out your own. You can use anything from just a regular piece of paper to maybe a used file folder, the little flyers you get in the mail, or you can purchase them. One advantage of purchasing them is they're all going to be exactly the same. And as you begin to sew them together, that is the easiest way to have your pieces so that they sew together properly. I will tell you as we begin to sew these pieces together how you can make ones that are exactly the same come together and never be able to tell it in your finished product. So to start, you're going to need to cut your fabric probably into strips. Now for this particular project with the 1-inch hexies, I usually cut my strips about 2.5 inches wide. It's a little bit wider than what you use, but I'd rather have just a little bit bigger seam allowance folded over on the back than have something that was really skimpy and had the chance of coming apart on me later. So a strip 2.5 inches wide, and then we're going to take that strip and cut it into a shape that's long enough to accommodate about 1/4 of an inch all the way around the hexagon. And trim off those little corners just so it's a little easier to deal with. And then what we're going to do is we're going to position that hexagon right in the middle of the fabric. And I use little bulldog quilts to assist me. It's not necessarily what you have to use. That's just what works best for me. And this quilt and this series of videos will all be about things and how they work best for me. There are certainly other ways to do it, and you may find a way that's much better for you. But in this case, this is what I'm talking about today. And give it a try, see if it works for you. If it doesn't, you can go another direction. Some people do use glue to assemble these and baste them. That is something I've never tried, to be honest with you. I don't like the idea of the glue being on my fingers or on the quilt itself when it's put together. I don't want to put the glue, if I choose to use a sewing machine, in my sewing machine. So that's not something that I've done, but I've heard that many people do and have fantastic success with it. Okay, so we've got the fabric in the middle, and we're going to just fold it over one side at a time and clip it down to hold it. And then we're going to go around it, and we're going to use the same motion each time. We're going to fold that corner over so we get a tight fold on the end right here. And then we're going to clip it right on the corner. So we've got everything clipped. And then we're going to just go around to all of the corners and do the same thing. It's very fast. Once you do it once or twice, you'll know exactly what you're doing. You don't even have to look at it, but you'll just go around and clip these. It's great to do, like I said, when you're watching TV. You could be listening to your child read their homework book. You could be waiting on an appointment. Whatever your situation is, it probably worked well. For me, it works great to be thinking about things I need to do and planning in my head what needs to happen the next day. I can do this at the same time. Now, then you're going to baste. For your basting, you can use any kind of thread you want. I'm using something that was left over from another project. The only caveat I will tell you is that if you were using a light fabric, you don't want to use a really dark thread, because for speed and efficiency, you probably won't be taking these basting stitches out. So you don't want them to show on the final product. So that's why I use a lighter thread and just use what I have left over. There again, it makes it a cheaper project because you're not having to buy special thread. So we're going to start on one corner. And we're going to take this, try to get this where you can see it. I'll have to do it a little bit backwards, but we're going to come in here, right at that fold where that fabric folds over into that corner. And we're going to go under and over so that we've created a little loop that catches both sides of that fold. And we're going to draw that tight. That's going to hold it on the first one because there's a knot there. On the second corner, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to go in on the flat side, up on the folded side, around back in on the flat side, and up on the folded side. So just like you did before, except that this time, when we draw that, we're going to catch that loop and come back through that loop and draw it tight in a little tiny knot. It holds very well. It doesn't require a whole lot of effort, but for the purposes that we're doing, it'll work great. So we're just going to do that around on each of the corners. And this next one I'll show you again. In on the flat, out on the fold, in on the flat, out on the fold, through the circle with the thread, and it's going to tie a little knot there. So we're just going to finish this up on the remaining two corners. It's very fast. Usually in just a few minutes, if I've got them folded and clipped in place, I can whip through 5 or 6 of these in just a couple of minutes and then fold some more. And like most of the supplies for this type of project, you don't need enough hexagons to do the whole project. You do need enough to get started. With this particular project, I had some homemade hexes that I used. I probably had about 200 homemade hexes, and then I purchased a bulk pack of 600 of these from Paper Pieces, and I'm going to finish the project with those. I think that I have 56 total of these, and it ran somewhere in the 800 count for hexes plus what I had left over. And as you begin to construct the pattern together, you can begin to pull those paper pieces out and use them again. They will accommodate probably 3, 4, maybe even 5 uses before they begin to get worn enough that you don't get an accurate result. Now, one other thing that I will say is that when you're making your hexes, if you're looking for a very formal look in your finished project, you may want to press these. With this project and this one, and then this blue one as well, that's what I did. I pressed every hexie after I made it, then after I started assembling them together, and then as I began to put the whole project together, I pressed as well. The project that I'm working on now, I've not pressed anything yet, and I probably have a 3 by 4 feet size quilt top at this point. So You don't have to do it. You might want to. You may feel more comfortable if it's really crisp. If you're making your hexes and you're going to store them a while before you assemble your project, I would recommend that because they take up less room once they're pressed. So now we have the hexie completed. And what you're going to do with these is you're going to start to assemble them. And you can see here I have 3 that I've sewn together. And as just an example to you, we're going to take one of these border pieces and sew it onto this, just to show you how it works. And it's going to sit right there. And we'll talk more about assembling in our next video. This is just to give you the basics of what's going to be required to do this, so you have an idea of what's going to happen and how it's going to work for you. So now on this, because I am using this as the constant fabric in this, I'm going to go with a little darker fabric thread that is going to match up with our fabric a little bit better. And with this one, I'm using an all cotton thread. And this is in a dark color. I'm not sure what this is called. It's dark gray or medium gray. And we've assembled a couple of these together. We're going to put this gray piece on. We're just going to put back to back, right sides to right sides, these 2 hexes. And just to keep it easy for us, I'm going to clip them together. And then you're going to take your knotted single thread into the corner. You're going to bring it out right there on the corner. And usually on these pieces, I will go in through just the very corner of both hexagons and sew them together and slip through that circle again like we did to make a little bit of a knot to hold it. And then you're going to just take just the tiniest little bite out of both colors, both hexagons. We're going to do just a little whip stitch around. This one's just being a little difficult for me, and you'll find that from time to time. It got caught there on the clip. So let's get that out. Okay, there we go. And then you're just going to whip through that little 1-inch where the 2 hexes are together. You just want to catch maybe 2-3 threads of each fabric each time. You want the stitches pretty close together because this is what's going to hold your quilt top together. Quilting it will give it a little bit more support, but these are going to be the seams that you're going to rely on to keep it together. So I would say maybe 12-14 stitches per inch would be about the right amount to use for this. Any more, it's kind of overkill, and any less, you're going to have some gaps when you put it together. So we've put our stitches in. We've gotten here to the corner, and you want to catch just the very corner of those threads here with that needle. Pull your thread through, and again, you're going to go through the circle to create a little knot. Now, you've got this sewn together, but this one needs to flip up here. And this was a whip stitch. Whip it over and over and over. Now we're going to flip it out, and we want to sew the gray to the blue. You're going to need to do something akin to a flat back stitch, which is very much like a whip stitch, only you're not folding them behind each other. You're going to fold them flat, and you're going to go in from one side, catch a few stitches, and then come back out. So this is the same thing. We're going to start right here at the corner, catch a little bit of both fabrics, go through that circle to create just the slightest little knot, and then we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to clip those first 2. Whoops. Thread flipped around to the other side of the hexes. There we go. There we go. And Same thing, about 12 to 14. These, because I'm having to hold these a little bit further away, they're a little bit longer than what I would ideally like. But you can see here, I hope, how those little stitches are coming together. And as I said, a little bit closer than this would be great. So we're going to get really quickly here so I can show you to the end of these two hexes. And I noticed that this hexie was a homemade hexie and this is a purchased hexie. So they're a little bit off. I don't know if you can tell there that the gray piece is a little bit longer than the blue piece. So what we need to do is we need to ease that blue piece up so that it is at the same height as the gray. We can do that a couple ways. We can do it manually by just kind of pulling on it a little bit, or we can do it in our stitches. And how we do it in the stitches is we grab the blue fabric. I've grabbed the blue fabric, and then instead of putting it straight across into the gray, we want to come up just maybe one thread and put it just one thread higher. And if you do that several times, and you do it with every stitch, let's say we do it every stitch for 3 stitches, I think you'll find that it just so slightly will work that fabric equally. And that's what I talked about earlier, how you can make pieces that don't really line up properly, line up the way they should. That's going to be one of your methods to do that. And sometimes you're going to see that it's just a slight bit of difference, and other times you may find that you could have as much as 1/4 of an inch. And when you do have a gap that large, you're going to need to start working early in that series of stitches to pull the shorter piece up. And it may look a little funky when you're doing it. It's going to have some puckers. But then once you take those papers out, the bigger piece is going to kind of shrink down a little bit, and the smaller piece is going to stretch a little bit. So it loses its foundation, so then it can kind of meld together a little bit better. So that's how that works. And I find that usually I don't have any problems. It's something that I can almost always work out in the stitches. So let's just do this. Okay, so here we are. We're at the end, and as you can see, they matched up. So we get to the end, we're going to do the same thing we've done before. We're going to take a circle around, and then we're going to draw that needle through the circle to create a knot. And then what I like to do, because it can get bothersome to have so many loose threads, is I'll just run this needle back through one of the sides, take a couple of stitches, so that now when I clip it off, and I clip it pretty close, that loose thread is tucked in to that seam allowance there. Let's take a moment to see up close what we're sewing. Our piece has been clipped together, and we're going to use our thread to secure the folds in the hexagon. The needle goes in on the flat piece and out over the fold, so you're looping the thread over that fold to hold it in place. As you do that, you create a little loop, and if you bring your thread up through that loop, it creates a slight knot on the fold, holding it in place even if the thread gets clipped between the small knots. Do this all the way around the hexagon. We're almost there. You see how quickly it goes to do this. It's just a matter of one little knot, one little stitch, one little knot on each corner. This will ensure that your pieces stay in place when you're sewing them together, and you get nice crisp folds over of the fabric over the paper. Okay, that one's all done. We just clip off the thread. This is a basting stitch. You can take it out if you want to. Usually I just leave them in. Now we're going to attach that piece to others that are assembled. Hold them together, right sides of the fabric together. Be sure to knot your thread so it stays in place. And we're going to come in underneath the fabric at the corner so the needle pops up right through the point of the fabric. And then move over and catch the second hexie. I'm going to create a little knot again by going through the circle of thread. And then you're going to whip stitch, catching just a couple of threads on each side to hold it secure. About 12 to 18 stitches per inch is plenty to hold this in place and give you a nice secure stitching to hold the quilt together once it's all assembled. Then when we get to the end, I usually like to put a little knot in the very end, pinching those two corners together so it closes up nicely where the pieces all come together. Again, it's fast and easy, nothing that requires a great deal of attention. And now we're going to do the flat back stitch after we unfold that hexie. All the pieces now are flat, and you're just going to go in on one side, catching 2 or 3 threads of the fabric into the second hexie. Again, just catching a few pieces of the fabric, and do that little flat back stitch all the way down. And you successfully now attached that hexie to your others. It goes together very quickly. That's last stitch. We're going to put a little knot in it, and then we're going to a couple of stitches up in the seam allowance to hide the end of the thread, clip it, and you're done. All assembled. That's all there is to it. So that's how you assemble them. And then what we're going to be covering in future videos is how to assemble these hexagons into larger shapes, and then from larger shapes to add the borders like we did with that gray piece, so that we'll end up with a larger piece. Let me just throw this over here like this to create a pattern. This is, like I said, a kind of a diamond pattern. You see the diamond here. And then we'll keep building on this, sharing techniques, things that's worked for me, things may work for you, and you'll learn how to put together a quilt with the English paper piecing. As I've said, English paper piecing is the easiest, in my opinion, type of piecing. It is not by far the fastest. If you're looking for something fast, this is not going to be the most satisfying project for you. But it does require very little special equipment. You can get started probably with what you have at home. If you have any scraps, needle and thread, you can give it a go and see how you like it. Today, if you're sitting at home and you have some scissors and thread and fabric, if you can just find a little flyer that came in the mail, cut out a hexagon. If you go on the internet and search for hexagon pieces or hexagon template, cut out a couple of them, print it out, cut out a couple of them, and give it a try. Well, thank you for joining me today. We've talked about beginning paper piecing with the English paper piecing method. Today we've discussed about how simple the project is, how it's mostly hand sewing. It requires very few specialized items that you You probably have most of the things you need at home already if you are doing sewing. It is a portable project. You can take it with you. It is simple to do. You can do it while you're watching TV or whether you're waiting in an office. In the future videos, we're going to be covering how to assemble the pieces into designs and how you use a fabric to be something that pulls it all together for you. We're going to talk about estimated amounts of fabric that you might need and how to judge that, and then how to finish your project, how you're going to put a binding on it. There are several different ways to address that and how you pull it all together, and then a little bit of discussion about how you wish to quilt it, and we will be covering the quilting as well. I prefer hand quilting. I do not have a long arm quilting machine, so any quilting that I do, my machine is done with my domestic unit. It can be done. There are many people who do that. If you choose to do that, that is going to be a great way to finish your quilt. But particularly with tops that have been pieced by hand, I tend to go with a hand quilting finish. So we will talk about that a bit as well and cover that. So I hope you'll join me on future episodes of this quilting using the English paper piecing method. Thank you again. See you soon.